The brush passed slowly through her hair, long strokes catching at tangles where silver met soot. Catherine June sat at the edge of the bed, staring not into the mirror, but beyond it, to a place where the wind didn't bite so hard and a woman could feel worth something just for breathing. She wasn't yet 50, but Clayton had taken to calling her old settler wife, like it was a title carved on a gravestone. Her hands were still strong. Her skin still remembered the heat of sun and softness of wild mint. But her hair told on her, and so did the silence between them. Tonight, the cabin walls were tight with tension. The kind that didn't yell, but curled beneath the floorboards, waiting to bite. Clayton sat at the table, boots muddy, shirt half unbuttoned, chewing his meat like it had insulted him. Dwayne was outside feeding the horses. As always. Strong hands, that man had. Quiet hands. The kind that didn't tremble. Catherine placed a tin plate in front of her husband. He didn't thank her. He never did. "You think you're better than me now?" Clayton muttered, without looking up. "All that gray in your head, you think it makes you wise?" She didn't answer. The only sound was the slow drag of the chair leg as she sat across from him. He drank hard from his cup. Set it down with a thud. "A man's got needs. You don't meet them no more." Still, she said nothing. "You're just dust in a dress." That one stung. He smiled to himself, like someone proud of a cut that bled fast. "You wanna be useful? I'll make you useful." Catherine watched him lean back, his boots on the floorboards like he owned the world. And maybe, in this stretch of prairie where law came late and decency came never, he did. "Dwayne," he called toward the door. "Come on in." She blinked once. Not in fear. Not yet. Just confusion. Like a deer hearing snow fall too loud. Dwayne stepped in, tall enough that the doorframe asked him to bow his head. His skin glistened with sweat from labor, his shirt soaked along the collar and back. He nodded politely, eyes lowered. Always respectful. Always silent. Clayton stood, stretching his arms wide. "Tonight, she's yours." The words dropped like an iron brand on warm skin. Dwayne didn't flinch. Just stood there, straight and dark and still. Catherine's heart didn't pound. It thudded low in her chest, like hooves on hollow earth. She looked from her husband to Dwayne, not fully understanding. Not until Clayton laughed, low and cruel. "You heard me. Take her to the shed. Use her. She's no wife of mine no more." She hadn't known a man could be turned into a weapon just by how he used his voice. Dwayne didn't move. Clayton stepped close to him, whispered something Catherine couldn't hear. Dwayne's jaw tightened, then relaxed again. He turned and walked out the door. Clayton looked at her. "Go on. He'll make a woman of you again." She stood slowly, refusing to rush, refusing to let her shame show. If she was to be dragged into the dirt, she'd do it standing. Outside, the sky was bruised purple. Stars began to blink open. The shed loomed near the barn, small, wooden, once used for feed and tools. It was cold there, even in spring. Dwayne was already inside when she reached it. A lantern glowed soft in the corner. He wasn't looking at her. He was sanding a piece of wood, long and curved, maybe part of a rocking chair, maybe something he never meant to finish. She stepped in. The door creaked shut behind her. He didn't speak, just pointed toward a folded blanket on a pile of hay in the far corner. A cup of water waited beside it. She stood near the wall, her back straight, arms wrapped around herself. The silence was unbearable, yet safe. Dwayne said nothing, did nothing. His hands moved slow across the grain of the wood, his breathing calm. "I'm not here for that," she said finally, voice like cracked porcelain. "I know." "Then why?" "'Cause if I refuse, he'll beat me." She nodded once. A woman who knew about beatings. Not from fists. From words. From nights spent wondering if she'd done something too small or too much. The air smelled of wood shavings, old sweat, and dignity. "I won't touch you," Dwayne said. "I know," she whispered. She sat on the blanket, pulling it tight around her. A cold draft pushed through the cracks in the wall. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled, not hungry, but lonely. He kept sanding, not rushing. "I used to want children," she murmured, unsure why she said it aloud. He paused. "But they never came. Not one." Dwayne turned his head slightly. His eyes met hers for the first time. They were deep, dark, and without pity. "Maybe that wasn't your fault." She blinked. "No one ever said that to me." He returned to his work. "Don't mean it ain't true." They stayed like that, two souls exiled by the same man, two lives made to carry other people's weight. Eventually, Dwayne set down the wood and stretched out on the floor beside the door. Not beside her. Not even close. She watched him from the hay. "Thank you," she said. He didn't reply. But his silence wasn't cruel like Clayton's. It was full of something sacred. In the dark, Catherine let her eyes close. The hay prickled against her back. The blanket barely held the chill. But she didn't cry. Or maybe she did, and just didn't notice. The lantern hissed low as the oil ran out. Hours passed. At some point, the moon slanted through the slats of the shed. Dwayne shifted in his sleep, hand resting near the carved wood. She watched him, this man who'd been made into a tool, but chose stillness instead of rage. She thought of her youth, of flowers pressed in books, and the first time she kissed someone behind the church stable. She thought of how long it had been since someone made her feel seen without needing to be desired. Her husband had thrown her into this shed like garbage. But Dwayne had offered her something she hadn't had in years. Safety. When dawn stretched pale fingers across the fields, the rooster crowed. Dwayne rose without a word, as if he hadn't slept at all. He picked up his wood and stepped outside, the door creaking gently behind him. Catherine remained on the hay, blanket tucked to her chin. And for the first time in over a decade, she didn't feel like someone's leftover. She felt like a person. Like a woman. Like salt and pepper were not decay, but proof of surviving. Her fingers brushed the wood where he'd slept. Still warm. She didn't know what today would bring. But she knew this. He could have taken her. He didn't. He could have pitted her. He didn't. And she would carry that like a secret badge, something silent and strong. Like Dwayne. Like the night. Like her own quiet heart, finally beating again. She had expected cruelty. But what she found instead was mercy. And mercy, she'd learn, could be sharper than any blade, and warmer than any fire. The wind changed on the fourth day. Not in temperature, but in sound. It no longer scratched at the windows like a beggar. It pushed. Low and restless. Like it was looking for someone brave enough to stand against it. Dwayne faced it without flinching. He stood at the fence post, shirt soaked through, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled up past elbows thick with labor. Rain streaked the dirt at his feet, turning the ground to mud, but he worked like a man who didn't mind the weight of the world. From inside the cabin window, Catherine watched. She had meant to bring him cornbread wrapped in cloth, maybe even a few quiet words. But she stood there with the plate cooling in her hands, struck by the sight of him, tall, upright, defiant in the storm. His back to the world that had shackled him. His eyes on the broken post before him, as if he were mending more than just a fence. Clayton was gone that day, off to town, most likely to drink and brag and forget he'd ever had a wife worth claiming. And so the farm sighed in his absence. It breathed. Catherine stepped outside, the wind yanking at her shawl, the sky dark with low clouds. The cornbread she held now seemed foolish. A child's offering. Still, she walked across the slick yard. Dwayne looked up only when her shadow crossed his boots. She didn't speak at first. She just held out the cloth, both hands cupped like an offering at an altar. He took it slowly, nodding once. "You're not afraid of storms," she said softly, eyes tracing the rain on his shoulders. He shrugged. "Storms don't last. Some do." Dwayne sat on the post and unwrapped the bread, not eating yet. His fingers, rough, scarred, beautiful in their own way, held it like it was worth more than a day's wage. "I heard Clayton's been talkin'," he said without bitterness. To who? Town. Church. Said I was too comfortable. She looked away, ashamed. Because of me. He didn't deny it. Catherine sat beside him, close but not touching. The wind whipped her hair loose from its pins, salt and pepper strands tangled like wild river reeds. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He nodded. "Do you hate me for being brought to you that way?" "No." She waited for more, but he offered nothing else. Just took a small bite, chewed slow. She looked at her hands. "You should. You didn't bring yourself." A gust shoved at them, and she shivered. Dwayne stood, removed his soaked outer shirt, and draped it around her shoulders. It smelled of cedar and horse and storm. It fit too big and too warm, and she swallowed back the sudden knot in her throat. He didn't sit again. Just returned to the fence, hammer steady, muscles taut with purpose. That night, she boiled herbs in water and brought the tea to the shed. Dwayne was working by lamplight, carving wood with quiet grace. "What are you making?" she asked. "Something that rocks," he said. "For the child I won't have." She blinked. "My woman," he said after a pause. "Before this place. She died in childbirth. So did the baby." Catherine felt the ache settle in her bones. "I lost 3, she whispered. He stopped carving. They never made it past the 3rd month. They stood in silence. Not pity, not pain. Just the kind of silence two people share when the past has already burned all the loud things away. She handed him the tea. He took it gently, fingers brushing hers just enough to spark heat in the chill. "I want to help," she said. "With the carving. With anything. I'm tired of sitting still." The next morning, she followed him into the barn. He showed her how to twist wire for the corral gate, how to stroke the mare's neck in a way that earned her trust. Her hands, once delicate and useless, began to crack and darken. And yet, she never felt more alive. Dwayne would nod in approval sometimes. Not praise, not compliments. Just quiet acknowledgement. He carved her a spoon one night. Left it on the corner shelf of the shed. No note. Just polished cherry wood, curved like a crescent moon. She held it like a secret. The town noticed. One afternoon, Catherine passed through the mercantile. Delilah caught her, draped in moral lace and judgment, stared with narrowed eyes. "You've taken to living among the animals, I hear," she said, voice syrupy but sharp. Catherine didn't answer. "They say your husband gave you away like a mule. But mules don't blush when the slave walks by." The words burned, but Catherine said nothing. She simply placed her coin on the counter and left with her flour. On the way home, she saw Dwayne hauling wood, the sun hitting his shoulders like bronze poured over strength. He didn't look up, but she knew he'd seen her. That night, Catherine took the spoon and stirred tea for both of them. They drank in silence. And when she laughed, just once at something he muttered about goats, he looked at her like the sun had risen early. But nothing in the west stayed soft for long. Clayton returned with rage clinging to his boots. He found Dwayne alone near the barn and struck him across the back with a whip meant for oxen. "You think you can charm my wife, boy?" Dwayne didn't cry out, didn't lift a hand. Catherine ran from the cabin, screamed for him to stop. But Clayton turned and shoved her to the ground. "Whore!" he spat. She crawled toward Dwayne, whose breath came sharp and shallow. His back bled through his shirt. His hands remained at his sides. "Say it," Clayton growled, towering above. "Say you belong to me." Dwayne looked past him, at her. "I don't belong to anyone," he said. And in that moment, Catherine felt something shift, not in the wind, but in her chest. Later that night, after Clayton passed out drunk on the porch, she crept to the shed. Dwayne sat upright, pain etched into his shoulders, face unreadable. She knelt beside him, washed his wounds with warm water and herbs. Her fingers trembled, but she worked with care. He flinched once. Not from pain. From her kindness. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You didn't swing the whip." "No. But I stayed too long." Dwayne looked at her, really looked, and said, "You came now." That was enough. When she left, she placed the blanket tighter around him than he had for her that first night. The wind howled outside, rattling the shed walls. But inside, there was warmth. Not from the lamp. Not from fire. From something slower. Something earned. The next morning, Catherine rose before dawn. She put on her boots. Pulled her shawl tight. She walked past the sleeping man on the porch. And out to the shed. Not because she had to. But because that's where the day began. She didn't know what would become of her, of them, but she knew this. The man who faced the wind had never bowed to it. And now, neither would she. The porch didn't belong to them. Not legally, not by name, not by paper signed in town with ink and smug faces. But it became theirs anyway. In the quiet hours between chores and judgment, when the sun stretched low and kind across the plains and time dared to soften. Dwayne had fixed the swing the second week of spring. Replaced the rusted chain, sanded the seat, oiled the nails so it didn't creak with every movement. Catherine had watched from the doorway, a rag in her hand, her heart doing something strange, something fluttering like old lace lifted by wind. She hadn't sat on a porch in years. Not like this. Not to rest. Not beside a man who saw her without needing to claim her. Most evenings, after supper, they found themselves there. Just two silhouettes tucked into the edge of a cabin that held too much history and too little peace. Dwayne would bring a whittling knife and a hunk of wood. Catherine would bring tea and silence. That silence, over time, had learned to say things. One evening, he handed her the carved piece. It was a sparrow, wings tucked, small enough to cup in her hand. "For your shelf," he said. She turned it over slowly. "What's it made from?" "Scrap pine. Same as the swing." She smiled faintly. "So we match." The porch swing swayed, slow and steady. The wind passed like a hymn. "I used to sit on porches before I married Clayton," she murmured. "My father's porch had vines crawling up the rails, wild and stubborn. He said if something tried that hard to climb, you ought to let it." Dwayne didn't interrupt, just listened with his whole body. That was his way. He didn't just look at her. He gave her the feeling of being held without arms. "You think vines get tired?" she asked softly. He looked toward the horizon. "They grow where they can." She nodded, blinking against something warm in her eyes. Their moments were small, but they stitched things inside her that had unraveled long ago. There were no grand gestures, no declarations. But one day he taught her to sand wood. Showed her how the grain could guide your hand if you let it. Her fingers, once only good for embroidery and teacups, began to understand usefulness. He'd say, "Here," and place the block of wood in her palm. Then he'd guide her wrist once, gently, and let her go. She practiced alone in the shed at night. Sometimes she'd look down at her raw fingertips and feel proud of the ache. Pride had been foreign to her for too long. She began to laugh more. Just little breaths of amusement. Once, she even teased him about a crooked chair leg. "Not all of us are born furniture," he replied dryly. But not everything was gentle. The townspeople had started watching her more closely. She felt it in the mercantile when the hush fell behind her steps. She heard it in the tightening of Delilah Cotter's voice at church when she mentioned God's design and keeping to one's kind. And though no one said it to her face, she saw it in the way the boys stared at Dwayne like he was a question no one dared to answer. One afternoon, she walked into the post office. A woman stepped back as if she carried disease. "You've fallen low," the woman whispered. Catherine looked her square in the eye and replied, "Then maybe the view is clearer from down here." She didn't flinch anymore. Shame had lost its teeth. But the whispers found their way to Clayton. He came home sour one evening, spitting dust and fury. "You smile too much these days," he said. She said nothing. "Got a nigger makin' you feel pretty?" She turned to him, eyes sharp as flint. "He makes me feel seen." Clayton slapped her. She staggered, but did not fall. Later that night, Dwayne found her by the corral, staring at the stars. Her cheek was bruised, the color not yet bloomed. He stood beside her but didn't ask. "I used to think silence protected me," she said. He stayed still. "Now I think silence just gave him more space to fill." Dwayne spoke low. "You have your voice now." She nodded. "I'm just not sure who to use it for." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next day, he handed her a book, a worn copy of Psalms. She opened to a page he'd marked. "He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds." "I don't believe much in Scripture anymore," she said quietly. "Then believe in what he meant," Dwayne replied. They went back to the porch that evening. Sat a little closer than before. The swing didn't creak. The sun dipped behind the hills in gold and hush. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me I don't belong here," she said. Dwayne exhaled slow through his nose. "Maybe we don't." She looked at him. "But here we are." That night, he didn't return to the shed. Instead, he sat by the door to the cabin until dawn, watching the fields as if something might come. When she opened the door in the morning, she saw the blanket draped across his shoulders. And in his lap, her carved sparrow. Still tucked. Still safe. The day passed quiet. Too quiet. And then, just before sundown, Clayton returned, faster than expected. He saw them on the porch. Saw Dwayne close to her. Saw her eyes soft with something that wasn't fear. His rage rose like a fire catching dry brush. "You sit on my porch like you earned it," he spat, voice slurred. Dwayne stood slowly. "You sit beside him like he's your husband." Catherine stood, too. Her voice calm. "This porch ain't yours. Not anymore." Clayton lunged, but Dwayne caught him mid-strike, held his wrist, then released it without harm. That restraint, that mercy, was more insulting than a punch. Clayton backed away. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Both of you." He turned and stumbled back into the cabin, slamming the door. Catherine's hands trembled. But not with fear. With something electric. Dwayne watched the sky, already darkening. "We should be ready," he said. She didn't ask for what. She already knew. The porch didn't belong to them. But neither did shame. And if war was coming, then let it come. They'd faced worse than fire. Now they had each other. And no one could take that quietly away. The town knew. Before the preacher spoke it into prayer, before Delilah Cotter whispered it through her corseted jaw, before the sheriff folded his arms and chose not to notice, the town already knew. It was in the way Catherine June began to walk. Not faster. Not quieter. But straighter. As if she'd remembered the shape of her own spine. It was in the way Dwayne stood when she approached. Not as servant. Not as labor. But as someone worth meeting halfway. And it was in the biscuit. One warm afternoon, she'd placed it in a cloth napkin and brought it to him in the barn. He was brushing down a gelding, his sleeves rolled, arms gleaming with dust and sweat. She didn't say much, just handed it over. He took it with both hands, nodding as if she'd passed him something holy. Delilah had seen from her buggy, slowed just enough to catch the moment. By sunset, tongues moved faster than horses. Clayton returned the next day, face hard as nails, his pride bruised beyond repair. "She's in the barn feedin' him biscuits," he spat to the sheriff, who only sighed and rubbed his temples. "She's your wife, Clay. Not the law's problem. He's a slave." The sheriff's voice dropped. "He's still a man." Clayton left without his whiskey. That night, he didn't sleep. Catherine heard him pacing, boots on pine, slow and seething. She stayed silent. Until he burst through her door just before dawn. "You've shamed me." She looked up from her cup of tea. "I was yours when you sold me like livestock. You ain't never been sold. You just didn't take payment." He slapped the cup from her hand. It shattered like something symbolic. That Sunday, he dragged her to church. The congregation parted like the Red Sea. Dwayne stood near the rear, arms folded, eyes calm. He wore a clean shirt. He had combed his hair. Catherine walked beside her husband, chin high, though her wrist throbbed from where he'd gripped it. The preacher was mid-sermon. Clayton marched to the front. "I got a matter needs speakin'," he barked. The preacher paused, nodding reluctantly. "This house belongs to Truth. She's defiled herself with that black buck you all keep near my barn. My wife. My name." Gasps spread like heat across the room. Catherine felt her skin burn. But she didn't flinch. "She lets him touch her," Clayton continued. "She feeds him, talks to him, smiles like she ain't mine no more." The silence that followed was long and terrible. Delilah Cotter stood. She shamed the Lord's design. The preacher adjusted his collar. "This is a serious claim." Dwayne stepped forward. Not fast, not proud, just steady. "I touched her only with kindness," he said. "If that's sin, then so be it." Clayton turned, fist raised, but Catherine stepped between them. She didn't cry, didn't plead. "He has more God in his silence than you ever had in your shouts," she said. The room froze. Clayton struck her, palm hard across her face. A collective gasp, but not one moved to stop him. Dwayne took a single step forward. The preacher lifted his hand. "Not here," he warned. "Not in the Lord's house." Catherine stood, cheeks red from more than the slap. She met the gaze of every person there. "You all see it," she said, "and you do nothing." A child cried in the back pew. A woman sniffled. But no one stepped forward. Dwayne reached her side, offered his arm. She took it. Together they walked out, through the aisle, past the wooden doors, into the wide, unforgiving sunlight. The doors closed behind them like a verdict. From that moment, the town turned colder. At the mercantile, no one weighed her sugar. At the well, the buckets were lifted before she arrived. In silence, they cast her out. And in silence, she endured. Dwayne worked the fields like nothing had changed. But something had. He looked toward the road more often. Slept lighter. One morning, Catherine found a burnt cross at the edge of the property. Just ashen wood and the smell of hatred. Dwayne buried it. She planted sage there. Clayton began to disappear more. Days at a time. He'd return meaner, sweatier, filled with quiet resentment that boiled under his skin. "Mark my words," he told her once. "The town won't forget." "I hope it does," she answered. "It forgets everything that matters." He nearly hit her again, but didn't. Dwayne began building a second shed, further from the main house. Not to hide, but to prepare. "You think they'll come?" she asked. "They already did," he said, meaning the church, meaning the stairs, meaning the burned cross. Catherine began sleeping with her boots nearby. But there were moments, still, when joy lived. They danced once. In the barn, after the horses were fed. A fiddle record played faintly from a crankbox. She had no grace left in her bones, but he didn't mind. He led with 2 fingers and a grin. "You're lighter than I thought," he said. "And you're heavier than you look," she teased. They laughed, real, deep, defiant. Love, in such a place, was more than survival. It was rebellion. But rebellion has a cost. It came one evening when the clouds hung too low and the birds disappeared early. Catherine was on the porch. The swing swayed with her breath. Dwayne had gone to chop kindling near the fence. Clayton rode in with 2 men, faces she didn't recognize. Rough hands. Eyes like broken bottles. She stood as they dismounted. "What is this?" she asked. "An undoing," Clayton sneered. One man held a rope. The other had a rifle. Dwayne saw them and dropped the axe. He walked toward the cabin, slow and deliberate. Catherine stepped between them and the porch. "Leave." "Step aside, woman," the rifleman growled. Clayton grinned. "She belongs to no one, remember? Said it herself." Dwayne stopped beside her. "You going to kill me in front of her?" he asked. Clayton stepped closer. I'm going to reclaim what's mine. Catherine didn't move. You already lost it. In that instant, something unspoken passed between the three of them. The man with the rope hesitated. You didn't say nothin' about no woman standin' guard, he muttered. Clayton snarled. You scared of her? Dwayne shifted. No, the man said. I'm scared of what a woman does when she's got nothing left to lose. The rifleman lowered his gun. Dwayne exhaled. Clayton stared, fury burning in his throat. But he couldn't move. Not with the others stalling. Not with her standing so still. Y'all cowards, he hissed. And just like that, they left. Not fast, but with the defeat of men who had failed to break what they thought was already broken. Clayton turned last. You think you won, he spat. No, Dwayne said. We just stopped losing. That night, Catherine didn't sleep. She stood at the edge of the porch until the moon sank low. Dwayne joined her, wrapping the shawl around her shoulders. What now? She asked. He looked toward the hills. We leave. Soon. Her heart tightened. Together. He nodded once. If you want. And for the first time in her life, she faced a choice that was hers alone. Not given, not forced, not survived. Just offered. And though the road ahead was wild and wide, her heart whispered something steady. Maybe love isn't what you fall into, maybe it's what you stand beside. They left at first light. Not like runaways, but like pilgrims. The sky opened pink and soft above them, a mercy after so many heavy skies. Catherine June wore her shawl tight around her shoulders, boots tied firm, a small satchel over her back. Inside it, her carved sparrow, a spoon, dried wild sage, and a Bible with no pages marked but one. Dwayne walked beside her, tall and still, carrying little more than a bedroll and the tools of his hands. His eyes stayed forward. His gait never rushed. They didn't speak until they'd passed the last fence post. Where to? She asked. He looked toward the trees, where the land curved like a question. Someplace quieter, he said. They walked until the town was a smear of roofs and smoke behind them. The land opened wide. Empty fields. Abandoned wells. An old trail used by trappers and folks who'd already lost too much. By the second day, their feet blistered. By the third, they'd run low on food. But Catherine never once looked back. At night, they camped beneath the stars. Not for warmth. For truth. Because there, wrapped in the hush of sky, everything felt honest. Her age. His scars. The strange peace between them. Dwayne built fires like he was born to it. Sparks rose like prayer. Catherine told him once, in a whisper, I used to think love had to announce itself. Loud. With kisses and tears. I was wrong. He nodded. Loud things fade. They shared bread when they had it, wild berries when they didn't. He caught a rabbit once. Cooked it over the fire. She closed her eyes when she ate. Not from guilt. From gratitude. She hadn't been fed with care in 20 years. On the 5th day, they reached a ridge that overlooked the river basin, blue as truth, winding deep like veins. And there it was. A shack. Weathered, roof half sunken, bones of a home waiting to be remembered. Dwayne stopped and studied it. This could work, he said. Catherine looked around. No paths. No watchers. Just wind and sky and time. She nodded. It already does. They spent the next weeks mending it. He fixed the beams. She cleaned the floor. Together they built a porch, not big, not even level, but wide enough for 2 chairs and silence. He carved her name into the post. Catherine June, spelled right, shaped smooth. She ran her fingers over it, then carved beside it, Dwayne. No last names. No owners. Just them. They planted onions and corn in a crooked garden bed. Hung dried herbs near the door. Found joy in the ordinary. Sometimes they sat close enough for her arm to rest against his. Sometimes they didn't. One evening, after supper, Dwayne handed her something. A folded paper, dirty at the edges. She opened it. A freedom paper. "You've had this?" she asked. "For some time. Wasn't safe to carry before." "It's real." He nodded. "You're a free man?" "I always was," he said. "But now the law agrees." She smiled and held the paper to her chest. "Would have loved you either way," she said. His eyes softened. "I know." Then came spring rain, weeks of it. Soft, then harsh, then soft again. The shack held firm. Their garden grew. And then came the knock. Not loud. Just one fist. 3 times. Dwayne reached for the door. Catherine stood behind him, breath still. A young boy. 12, maybe. Soaked to the skin. Shivering. "Are you the man named Dwayne?" he asked. "I am." "Town's talkin'. Said you ran off with a settler's wife. Said there's a reward." Catherine's heart clenched. Dwayne kneeled. "You bring others with you?" "No, sir. But others are comin'. Sheriff's men. Maybe more." Catherine stepped forward. "You hungry?" The boy blinked. "A little." She handed him bread and dried apple. Wrapped it in cloth. "Run the other way," Dwayne said. "Don't stop for 3 miles. Don't look back." The boy nodded. "You don't seem bad." Dwayne smiled, slow. "That's 'cause we ain't." The boy left, food under arm, hair dripping. That night, they didn't sleep. They packed little, just what mattered. Left the garden, the chairs, the carved names on the porch. They made it to the trees before the dogs came. 3 riders. 1 with a lantern. 2 with rifles. The sheriff among them. "Dwayne Freeman," the sheriff called. "You got 2 choices. Come with us quiet, or we come in loud." Dwayne stopped walking, turned slowly. Catherine grabbed his hand, held it tight. The sheriff dismounted. "You're harborin' stolen property," he told her. "I'm nobody's property," she said. He motioned to the men. "Take her." One moved forward. Dwayne stepped between. The man raised his rifle, but Dwayne didn't flinch. The second man hesitated. "She ain't your business," the sheriff barked. "She's my home," Dwayne said. The first man pulled his rifle up, but before he could aim, the boy from earlier burst from the trees, screaming. "She's pregnant." The world stopped. Everyone froze. Catherine's eyes went wide. "What?" The boy pointed. "She's carryin' a child. From him." That's why they ran. It wasn't true. But it made the riders hesitate. Made them look at her belly. Made them think. The sheriff spat. "A bastard child don't change nothin'." Dwayne held Catherine's hand tighter. "I said go," he told the riders. The sheriff raised his weapon. And then Catherine stepped forward. Between them. "You kill him," she said. "You'll have to kill me." The second man lowered his rifle. "She ain't lyin'," he whispered. "Look at her." Catherine lifted her chin. The boy nodded fiercely. "She's showin'." Barely. Dwayne didn't speak. He just breathed. Slow. Certain. The sheriff cursed. "This ain't over." And then they left. The boy smiled. "I figured they needed a reason." Catherine hugged him. Dwayne whispered, "Smart as rain, that one." They returned to the shack. Together. The porch still held their names. And the swing. Still there. The garden. Still blooming. They danced again that night. No music. Just heartbeats. Afterward, he lit a lantern and sat beside her on the bed. "Will you be mine?" he asked. "I already am. But proper. My name. My vow. My breath." She nodded. He carved a ring of cedar. She carved one of twine. They said no vows but this. "I see you." as you are, as you've been, as you will be. And they sealed it with hands held in moonlight. They were never hunted again. Maybe the sheriff knew shame. Maybe the writers spread stories that blurred. Maybe no one cared after enough time passed. But Dwayne and Catherine, they lived. Not loudly, not perfectly, but truly. And on Sundays, she baked. He built a new porch, sturdier, wider. People began to pass through. Lost ones, lonely ones, tired ones. And they always left better. Because love lived there. Love that had no name for it. Love that was once called sin. But it felt like Sunday. And one spring morning, she held a child. Not of her womb, but a Lakota girl, orphaned and brought to the door in a storm. Catherine wrapped her in a quilt and whispered, "You're safe now." Dwayne watched from the doorway, eyes warm. They didn't speak of legacy. They lived it. The porch stayed full of stories. The swing never empty. The shame forgotten. The sin forgiven. The names, Dwayne and Catherine June, spoken only in reverence. Not because they were saints, but because they were human. And they chose love. Every single day. They called it a sin. But the porch never judged. The trees never whispered. The wind never turned its back. And if you ever wonder what love looks like when the world says it's wrong, just picture two hands, weathered and brown and soft and white, folded together like a prayer. That's all it ever was. And that's all it ever had to be.